you're running into the elbow on complexity, right? Because
Mm.
complexity grows exponentially and everything feels good right until you hit that elbow.
Hey everyone, welcome. Today I'm sitting down with Carson Gross, the creator of HTMX, someone who's reminded us that the web already had most of what we needed all along. This isn't going to be a standard Q&A. Carson's already answered a million what is HTMX questions, so we're just going to have a chat and spend a bit of time wandering around some ideas. Let's jump in just after I've given Carson some context into my background as a full stack developer working with front end frameworks, and after I encountered the issue repeatedly in different contracts where I hit a stall in productivity. This is a nightmare. This can't be the best way to do
Yeah.
things.
What you're
Go on.
experiencing there is you're running into the elbow on complexity, right? Because
Mm,
complexity grows exponentially and everything feels good right until you hit that elbow. And then suddenly everything it just you can I've been on many projects where you can feel it when that hits if you have some experience. Like you just run into this wall and the complexity is too big now and it's so hard to make progress. And often the solutions that people propose seem reasonable up front, but then they end up making things worse. Like an example I have from my past was we ran into that same complexity wall. The company I was working for, and someone's like, "We need to go to OSGI, which is a mechanism for like organizing modules in Java." And we did a big 6 month transformation to get everything into OSGI modules, and then like it got even worse. Like you could make no progress anymore with the app. So it's a
yeah,
common experience, and I think like as you get older and get more experience, you can start feeling that when you run into a wall and it just slows down. So
yeah. That was exactly the feeling. It was that sense of deceleration to the point where everything just stalls, and you're like, I've been here so many times. There's got to be a better way. And I think at around that time, a friend of mine said, "Hey, you should check out this HTMX thing." And I think it was right. It might have been before version. I think it was before version 1. So I think it was very early on, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll just give it a go." And then I started looking at and I think it was like literally a sentence in, and I was like, "You got me. This is it. This is it." And I know some people have had to play with it to kind of get the the buy-in for it, but for me, I think I felt like it felt so familiar in terms of going back to the kind of PHP. It was that light switch moment where you kind of go, "Oh, why why did we why did we do that again? What was the why did we go jQuery, React, Knockout, Meteor, all those different things, and then just pushing things on top of it, React Query, and all of these so- solutions to try and solve the problem that you'd created in the client." And I saw what you were doing, and I was like, "Oh my word, that's amazing! Um, that's gonna do it." And I just jumped both feet first in, and I was like, every project I was on, then it was like, you need to use this approach, and people are like, "You're crazy! You can't
right.
you can't do that." I'm like, "I'm doing it."
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That's great to hear. It's definitely not everyone's reaction to HTMX. Uh, so, but I think, if you've been around a while and you saw like the old way of doing web development, and you asked earlier about like where HTMX came from, and it basically came from that experience where I was Angular at the time, and someone was like, I think we were doing that startup that ended up blowing up, and they were like, we
Mm,
got to do Angular. And I
mhm.
did it for like a week and I was just like, this is crazy. Like,
Yeah.
we're building an application that does not require all this stuff. And we were using jQuery at the time because jQuery was what everyone used, like
Mm,
2010 timeframe. And there's a jQuery.load, which is a
Yeah.
function that like will issue a get and then just take the response and put it into something. And I saw that and was like, whoa, cool. You can do Ajax, but not get JSON back. Like, that's cool. And then
Yeah.
I started building like a wrap around that. And I was like, well, I wonder if I could do a post. And then, so I had this kind of like helper function that I was issuing queries with on clicks, like everything was in line and it was very sort of like, hacky. I don't know, not maybe not that hacky, but and then I just got the idea, like this could just be an Angular. If you remember Angular 1, it used
Yes.
attributes
Yeah.
for behavior, and
That's
I
right.
didn't I didn't like Angular like the way it did things, but I liked that. Like that was the
Yeah.
one that I really liked that. Like, oh, use attributes and declarative feeling stuff.
Yeah.
And so then I started playing around with that idea and hooking this function that I'd built in via
Hmm.
attributes and an onload handler. And then that eventually grew into intercooler, which
Yeah.
I really released, I think, in 2012 or something like that. And
Right.
that was my first real open source project. And so it was a very much like, I was an old school web developer used to the web 1.0 way, and Angular just was and
It
so
was horrible.
I mean, the thing is, it's useful. Some people use it and they love it, and I don't like criticizing other people's approaches to web development very much
I only say
because
it's horrible. I've still got an app out
yeah,
there that I
okay,
built in Angular
right.
1, and it's still there and still in production because I can't change it. I I can't go I can't go
That
back.
sounds, yeah, that sounds like a bad thing, but I don't want,
Yeah.
I like to focus on the positive stuff. So I think
Yeah.
HTMX, like, intercooler JS got kind of popular. I think 5,000, 6,000 stars. And then during COVID, I mean, you've heard this story, I'm sure, a million times, but I
Mm.
rewrote it without the jQuery dependency, and that became
Yeah.
HTMX 1.0. And then we had 2.0, which was a couple of years ago, and now we just announced that we're going to do a 4.0, which is going to switch the internal. I know, I feel bad about it, but I did fix EJS, which is like a hyper minimalist version of HTML. It's like less than 100 lines of code, and
Wow.
it has like 30% of HTMX's functionality, and you have to to use it for real stuff. You have to do a lot of scripting, which is fine
Right.
for some people. So it's good. I don't want, it's great. It's a great project, and it got me familiar with the way fetch and async worked. And I was looking
Hmm.
at that, and then looking at the HTMX implementation, and was just like, dude, this would be so much simpler if we just switched to fetch, which I didn't do. And I would have done HTMX initially in fetch, but
Yeah.
I had this like idea that I was going to keep it IE compatible, like, and
Right.
that started as like something serious and then turned into a meme. And unfortunately, maybe that meme hamstrung me a little bit.
Yeah.
The 2.0 release, we talked about going to fetch. We talked about a lot of stuff for the 2.0 release, and I just got super conservative with it because mainly because the HTMX 2.0 code base was getting so big, and I was just like, stop touching things. Like we can't
Yeah.
add any more features.
I've
It's
been in
getting
there.
yeah,
It,
it's a
it's
beast.
long.
It's yeah, and we added, like I feel bad because we added JS doc, whatever the type annotate, like
Yes.
it's just a mess. The guy who did that was like he absolutely beast moded it for like 3 weeks or like a
Right.
month to make that happen.
Yeah.
And then there's all this junk in there, and like it never there. I can think of two bugs in the history of HTMX that it would have caught, and both of those should have been caught by tests. It was a test coverage issue, and
Right.
so I'm just like, lessons learned. I didn't know. Like I like static typing. I'm a Java guy, like on the server
Yeah.
side. So
I
um,
mean I use TypeScript all the time now, so
yeah,
I resisted it initially because to me it just felt dirty, but uh I
yeah,
that I was forced to use it, and then I've kind of fallen in love with it. Um
yeah.
so I
I'm
do
not a
everything with
I'm
type.
not a I'm not opposed to it. I just don't like having a build step. I really like having HTMX JS load in a browser like directly. And so I think I'm not going to use JavaScript on the server side or whatever.
Exactly.
But I
Yeah.
think for HTMX, I think the test suite is good enough, and the API to it is pretty tiny, so we can maintain a separate TS file for that. So I think
Well, I think
that's
since HTMX, I haven't had to write a lot, any real. serious client side JavaScript. So
Right.
that's why I've been able to stay in TypeScript. Otherwise,
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
JavaScript.
And I think TypeScript is an excellent server-side language for sure. Like that's it's because it's I mean it's by Anders Hejlsberg, the C sharp guy basically, and he's C sharp is a better version of Java. Like I would use C sharp in a heartbeat. I think he's a funny story. He like I was probably one of like 20 people in Palo Alto who knows who Anders Hejlsberg was like in 2005 or something like that.
Right.
And because I was into programming languages and I was at grad school there and all that stuff. And my wife and I used to walk through the Stanford shopping mall in the mornings before all the stores open because it's like, I'm not a big mall person, but the Stanford shopping mall is unbelievable. It's like the gardening and the flowers, and it's like the Garden of Eden. Like it's unbelievable. And so we would
Yeah.
go, we would go and walk through, and start. There was a Starbucks. I apologize to everyone for drinking Starbucks coffee
I
occasionally,
like
but
Starbucks. So we don't need to bother.
but we would go and get a coffee and then walk through, and it was quiet and beautiful and all that. And like we're walking through at probably like 7:30 in the morning or something like that. And who else is walking through the Stanford shopping mall but Anders Hejlsberg? And I'm like, that's Anders Hejlsberg. And at the time, I'm like, I look even crazier at that point in my life than I look now. And I like run up to him. He's this like button down European guy, and I like
How did
run
you
up to him
recognize him in that
because I knew
context?
because I knew his face. Like I'd read a bunch of because C sharp was like
Hmm.
competing with Java, and you just I'd watched talks of his. I just knew who he
Right.
was, and he was the hero of a guy who was like my hero, like that I worked
Right.
with, and so I just knew everything. Like it was pretty bad situation, and I like run up to the guy and I'm like, "Are you Anders
Fanboy.
Hejlsberg?" Totally. And he's like, "Oh, yes." And I'm like, "Can I take a picture with you?" And I have my wife take a picture of me with Anders Hejlsberg in the
Have
Stanford
you got
shopping
it? I
mall.
want to see that
I
picture.
did. I have to find it. It's on one of my phones, but
Right.
like it was just like such a crazy situation. Like just got lucky, or maybe
It's
got
probably the
unlucky
only
from.
time he's ever had a photo taken from somebody in the street.
Yeah, definitely. Like, oh boy, it's embarrassing to admit. Like, I was a big fanboy,
That's
and I was
great.
I was pretty starstruck by him. So, but it was fun. It's fun. It's a fun story.
Would do you, like in terms of how you think HTMX has taken off?
Hmm.
Because I was surprised. I thought I was going to be in the trenches for a long time by myself, where it felt like I was fighting a battle every time I would go into a new situation and be faced with the kind of horde of like let's do it the client side framework way, and I was kind of like just me there going there is
Right.
another way. There's another way. And like nobody, no, there's not. Come on, don't be silly. And how long it that really feels like that's changed. I thought it was going to be like that for a long time. I did think it would change eventually because like eventually people see that this stuff works, right? But what do you think has shifted that? Why do you think it's been so fast to turn around?
I think we got really lucky. I think, I don't know about you, but I don't feel in control of a lot of things in my life. I think I do what I try to do the best I can and be as nice as I can in every situation. But a lot of things like they just happen. And, I gave that talk at Big Sky DevCon 2 years ago where I said, like luck is a big part of things. And
Mm,
that's a big part of HTMX is luck. Like it's not that different than intercooler JS, which was around for almost a decade before HTMX got popular. And so why did HTMX get popular and intercooler JS didn't? Well, I got lucky,
right
Primeagen.
place.
Exactly. Like we had to go through the experience of everyone building very complicated front ends and
Mm,
recognizing that that's not always appropriate. It's appropriate for many things. Again, I don't want to be negative on that stuff. It's
yeah,
appropriate for many situations, but it's not
totally.
appropriate for everything. And like the industry kind of had to get to a spot where it was mentally ready for like this other message. And then, the Primeagen and, Fireship Dev and the book all hit at once. And also uh, Twitter changed their algorithm like at that same time that like prior like there was a point when every post I made was like on everyone's front page, and like everyone was seeing it, and like I would get HTMX was trending all the time, just whatever. It's changed since then, so HTMX hasn't trended since then. So there was just
Yeah.
this confluence of events that happened to, open up a small window, and everything was ready to go. The book, which, there's another example of a catastrophe turning into something that was good for me, because the reason we released the book at that moment was because the publisher who had previously contracted with us for the book backed out, and
Right.
so we'd been ready to publish that book like almost a year before with a publisher, but they backed out, and so then we spent a year rewriting it to what I think is a much better book.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a great book.
and it was ready to go right when all that stuff happened. So just, that's luck. And, in my Big Sky DevCon talk, what I say is, if luck is a big part of things, then the most important thing, or one of the, so, okay, what's actionable? Like, what can you do, given that luck is
Yeah.
a big part of things? What can you do to maximize luck? And it's hard to, by definition, luck is hard. It's like, it's luck. But what you can do is you can hang around. And I think that, like, a lot of people get knocked out of things by not hanging around, because they, I did, this kind of happened with Intercooler.js. I didn't give up on the project. I kept supporting it, but I just wasn't like out there pushing the project.
Yeah.
Whereas with HTMX, I just was like, you know what, I'm gonna have fun. And I think that's the thing for me that really made a big difference, is like, I was just like, you know what, I don't care. I do care, but I can't make this happen. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be like, I enjoy being funny. I enjoy messing around. And when you do that, like, it makes it tolerable for when the world isn't looking at your stuff, or when, people are being
Totally.
negative or whatever. And so that's what I say is, I think, like, and I'm not a naturally, I've gotten more optimistic as I've gotten older, which is, it's usually the opposite. But,
Yeah.
that's the one thing that I would say for people that, if a lot of stuff comes down to luck, it's important to hang around, and having fun, and like not being negative. Yeah. That's, again, that's a reason why I try not to be negative about other technologies. I just,
Love
you
that.
know, so.
I love it. That's great. I can be negative because it's not my software, but uh, about no, I won't be. Don't worry. I think for me it was a pivotal turning point to deal with a problem that I felt like had been just compounded by all these frameworks fighting for top position. And so it was
Mhm.
like, this solves it. And it felt like we were moving further and further away from what the actual problem was. Um, so, I mean, like philosophically, do you feel like it's more of a like a rebellion or a restoration against and
They're both the same thing, right? Like, when the rebels won, rebellion against, it's like the same thing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get too political or anything like that, but I think you can look at it from both perspectives. It's definitely like taking hypermedia seriously, and I hope, for all my silliness, like, I've done academic work on hypermedia and tried to
yes,
formalize the definition of hypermedia controls and stuff like that. And so taking hypermedia seriously is at some level of restoration. It's also, I think there's an aspect of rebelliousness and like not going with the crowd, to HTMX, and that's my personality in general, which is good and bad. There's times when that's
disruptive.
there's times when that's good, and there's times when that's bad. So,
Yeah.
so
And I
I,
think that's probably you probably attracted those I mean I'm like that. So you probably
yeah,
attracted those kind of early adopters who
yeah.
are equally disruptive. And what I found is that your the humor and the keeping it light and just not taking a crap what people thought really helped to keep me into the it kind of created a bit of a culture and an ecosystem around it that made you feel part of the in group, and so it felt like a community, um, a bit of a fellowship of of rebels who were finding a new way through, and I think that just grew, and the more voices that came and piled on, it didn't. what was nice about it is it didn't transform or change into like an enterprise kind of like and now I'm the important CEO. Da, da, da. And
Right.
I think it
Right.
just carried on being silly, and I think that was
Yeah.
just perfect because
Yeah.
that's what everyone came for, and that's what everyone's
Yeah.
staying for. I think.
Yeah, yeah, it's been interesting to, because one thing that I've seen happen and I dislike it is you have an in group, right? And
Mm,
that's natural. Humans want to
yeah.
be like in a group, and that, there's, especially in the modern world, there's very few sources of like acceptable identity, and so these like
Hmm.
online
Yeah.
identities form that's actually a really interesting topic. I'd love to explore more,
Hmm.
but the problem whenever you have an in group or some group at all is that then the out group becomes the enemy. And again, that's why I try really hard not to focus on other technologies being bad. I will take shots at React just because they're the 900-pound gorilla and whatever. Like they can take it. It's all good. They don't care. They do not care. But
But I
I
get it.
try
You're
even
saying
even
no to tribalism.
yeah, trying to just be like, it's a big tent. There's a lot, like I joke about it because I'm always like, man, because I follow a lot of people on Twitter that have very different political beliefs, like
Yeah.
incompatible political
Yes.
beliefs. And I'm like, it's a good thing that, you guys don't meet up in person, and I'll see you all at Big Sky DevCon in person.
For a big fight. Yeah.
Like I've tried really hard to keep the community positive and you know, be like, it's a big tent, guys. Like, we're not going to fight. We don't allow political fights to spiral on the Discord, which I don't love Discord, but it's the thing that works right now. And, we just ask people, like, hey, there's plenty of places to fight and there's plenty of places to
Yes.
be negative.
Totally.
Let's make this place not one of them. Because if you want that,
Absolutely.
that's cool, but this will hopefully be a respite. And I hope the community in general around HTMX reflects that. Like, like be reasonable, like, don't push, like HTMX isn't a silver bullet and other technologies all have their place and it's all good. And hopefully HTMX can work pretty well with them. And if it can't, like, let's address that fact.
And I think that's a really important message, right? Because the natural the prop this problem has been caused by a pendulum swing effectively
Uh-huh.
initially. So you've got we needed to solve a problem, and then the pendulum just swung all the way to let's solve it this way, and everything got thrown in that bucket. And now the danger is, now we realize that was wrong, that the danger is you swing it the entire other way and throw everything out that's over
Yeah.
there. And I totally agree. I think there's one of the things I'd like to get on to talking about is the something that I thought would probably not be a place where hypermedia systems would work, but it's actually turned out for me to be a place that's been quite productive to use a hypermedia approach. So
Right.
then I started getting into the AI stuff about 3 years ago,
Mhm.
and I was everybody's building React apps, Next.js apps for chat apps and all that kind of thing. And I'm like,
Yep.
I can't leave HTMX. I can't do, I can't do it. I'm just loving this pattern too much
Yeah.
to just throw it away just because I need a real time interface. And
Right.
so I just started playing around with how can I make this work?
Hmm.
Um, so that just kind of gets me onto the real time stuff. Is this something that you've been thinking about, kind of giving it a pulse, giving hypermedia a pulse and bringing it alive?
Yeah. Well, HTMX had server side event support
Hmm.
in 1.0,
Yeah.
and then we moved it out to an extension in 2.0. And we have a and there's a WebSockets extension as well. I have to admit, I'm just not as plugged into that stuff. The apps that I tend to build, although I do have to say that it's changed in the last year. So one thing I've done in the last year, I started building emulators for I teach systems classes like assembly and stuff like that at Montana State, and the tooling around assembly and like understanding CPUs and everything for computer science people in general is pretty
Hmm.
atrocious. And I was
Yeah.
just like, enough. I need to build my own tools to like show the students how CPUs work and like, put in cool blinking lights and like stuff like that to make it like engaging and all that stuff. And I built web interfaces for those emulators so that students could see things visually. And you can do a lot with the web, obviously. And in both of I did two of those projects in the last year, and in both of them, I ended up using Fixie, which is that super minimalist version of HTMX, just to like kick the tires and see what I could do with it. And then usually just raw server sent event sockets, like or whatever the server event thing.
Yeah.
And when I did that, I was typically just responding to events because I would use that for like, I would stream out an image and then plop the image in or something like
Hmm.
that. And so that experience made me, start thinking about like, hey, maybe, maybe there's more to it. There is more to this. Like I'm using it for these two projects, these emulator projects, and it'd be cool to have this just baked into HTMX. And when we decided to do the fetch, because really the big thing for HTMX4 is removing the fetch from, from XHR.
Mm.
And that gives us the async infrastructure and all that other stuff. But one of the cool things about Fetch is that you can do streaming responses really easily with them. And we always wanted to do streaming responses, like where, chunks of content are coming down and we're inserting
Yeah.
them into the DOM. That's very, a lot of chat, like AI chat systems, like need that pattern. And
Totally.
we didn't have a great pattern for it in the core HTMX for 2.0. So, and I just randomly, a kid reached out to me from Romania, like a month ago, and was like, hey, I'm interested in this, and and he was actually, that conversation was what got me to like pull the trigger on a 4.0 because
Right.
he was really pumped on streaming in particular.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know what? That sounds great. I've been thinking really hard about doing a fetch
Mm.
implementation anyways after my Fixie experience. And I know you can do streaming, so why don't you take a crack at that? And so that's in four. Now,
Right.
WebSockets are their own thing. And I like WebSockets. I don't think they would be in core of HTMX, but we have a WebSockets extension. And I know you've built software that takes the ideas of HTMX and sort of maps them onto WebSockets a lot. When I looked at it, it looks a lot cleaner than our existing WebSocket implementation, and so that's something that I would definitely love to look at for like a WebSocket implementation for HTMX4. So
Well, I'm in. Yeah, count me in.
perfect,
Uh,
awesome.
I love it because for me, the whole WebSocket thing was just I tried to avoid. I tried to avoid. I'm at that age now, like probably the same as you, where I try to avoid any kind of complexity because I just know that even if it's a little bit complex to start off with, it's just going to snowball into
Yep.
something. And so all of
Ask
these kind.
ask me how I know.
How do you know?
Ask me how I know. Look at some of my software. I did a bad job of saying no. I'm gonna try and be really disciplined about saying no for HTMX4. So
Well, I mean, the WebSocket thing for me was like a needs must, right? Because you're talking to these, especially on the server side, right? So I was building these AI server side applications that having to talk to multiple, and I've been building voice AI for like the last 3 years. So that's been taking real time audio from the client. So you're streaming that up. So you've got to have a WebSocket connection with your server, and then you've got to have a WebSocket connection with a transcription service, and stream the audio to the transcription service and get chunks of streamed text back. And then at the same time, you're going to stream that to, or figure out when the end of the turn is for the user. And then when you've got an end of turn for the user, you then send it to an LLM, and that's through an API that you're going to stream the result back to the server. And as you're streaming the result back to the server, you're going to stream it to a text to speech engine on an API, which is a WebSocket. And that's going to stream audio back to the server. And then you're going to stream that audio back to the client. It's just a horror fest of streams. And I was like, building all this stuff in TypeScript on Cloudflare, and it works great. It's really nice and fast. It's like magic. It works a way that you don't think it should work. It's way faster than you think it should work. But the problem I had was like then I wanted to start building interfaces with this stuff, and I'm back to like, well, I'll use HTMX for the website, but then I'll get to the control for my voice agent or for my chat agent, and then I'm having to switch to Alpine or to React or to something else, and I'm just not liking this kind of hybrid approach too much. And so that's why I built that WSX solution, because I thought, well, why not just employ the same hypermedia approach to streaming chunks of,
Hmm.
well, all the rule is just we're returning HTML, right? So the rule is I am connected and it has to send JSON back because that's the transport layer, right? But I'm effectively just going to send HTML back through the pipe, and
Hmm.
not signals particularly. And
Hmm.
then I also need to have some signals as well to do the audio stuff because that's a kind of separate problem. But if I do it all in the same, I can use the same pipe to send requests up, send HTML back. And
Hmm.
then, so that's why I built that thing. And for me, that was a kind of turning point where I thought, wait a minute, maybe hypermedia can solve all of these problems. Maybe we need slightly different transport mechanisms for them. What are your thoughts on like kind of growing it in? Does that break the idea of hypermedia for you, or is that what's the?
I'd need to see the details. Like like I'd need, it always takes me a long time to form an opinion on things. This tends to upset some people because, like, people will be like, "Hey, check this out. Isn't this great?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it looks all right." And then they take that as like, "Okay, let's go." And then I'm like, "But hold on." Like,
Yeah,
I need to sit with this. Like, I had to do Fixie and like sit with it for, a year before I was like, okay, like I get it now. And that's just the way that I am personality wise. So I like what I'm hearing and I want to see more. And I wish to subscribe to your newsletter, right? Like, um, but, I'm always I tend to be more like, I think conservative about things. Like, when people bring new ideas to me, I sit and I try to wonder for a little bit. Like, I wonder if that's a good idea or not, and not like immediately jump
that's
to like,
healthy, right?
it can be like there are times when it's bad. I think that like part of it is in my experience with my own naivety, my own, like I've, in the past gotten really excited about things and like jumped in
Uh-huh.
with 2 feet and been
Yeah,
burned. And so that has made me more likely to now just like, okay, hold on, let's like think about this for a little bit and let's try some different approaches out. That's one thing I really like doing is trying like two or three different ways and not getting too attached to one particular way. I fall victim to that. Usually the first thing I think of, I fall in love with it. And so,
yes,
but I try, to always, or not always, but I often try to like try two or three different approaches, which nowadays with, AI, like you can often do that for
really good.
very, very inexpensively. And
Yeah,
if it's throwaway code, like who cares if a clanker wrote it? Like
it's great.
let's just see what, like maybe try this and what does that look like and what are the ramifications of it? And so I think that's something I'm gonna do software at my software engineering class next would be next fall, so in fall of 2026. And I'm going to try and start incorporating some of those ideas, like, because
Yeah,
AI, I know there's a lot of negativity around AI and I get it, and all of the rest of it, but it does, I think it changes the game a lot. I can't believe I said that, but it does change things. Let's say change things. It does make two things in my
don't worry, the
experience.
Primogen won't watch this, so you can see.
I know. I can say whatever I want. No one's gonna watch this anyways. No one cares. But the two things that it's really changed for me are number one,
Uh-huh.
prototyping. Like it's
Yeah,
very fast to prototype stuff now.
rapid.
So you can be like, is this a good idea or not? Just make this
Hmm.
thing. And you can go and look at the code. And as long as you keep it small and like whatever. You can look at the code and be like, yeah, that actually looks pretty good. Like that's a decent idea. Or like, oh, obviously this isn't going to work because of whatever. And then also unit testing, which I have never been a big fan of unit testing, because unit tests, the problem with unit tests is that they're often very low level and they often commit you to a particular approach because they're like for one method.
Absolutely.
You get stuck with like that method now. And if you yank that method out, well, all those tests break. And then it's one of these things where if you're on a big team, like, did those tests break because I made an architectural change, or did they break because I really broke something? And that can be
Yeah.
difficult. So it's one reason why I've always been sort of lukewarm on unit tests. But I do have
Yes.
to say, I've had success where when I've written a function that I'm pretty
Hmm.
sure is going to live for a long time, saying like, okay, Clanker, give me a bunch of unit tests for that function. And then I'm going to
Hmm.
treat those unit tests, like people say this, like treat your databases like cattle, as a cattle
Hmm.
instead of pets. So now I'm moving towards like, okay, because you do find, it finds bugs and corner
Yeah.
cases and stuff like that. But then you can't take those tests too seriously, because if you change stuff, then you don't want them to, you don't want those to be a drag as you're changing the
No.
architecture. On the other hand, if you have a good architecture that you're happy with, then you're in a position where you can be like, okay, like I'm happy with this architecture. Like, let's go down and just make sure we capture all these corner cases. So that's something that I've been using successfully, I think, I hope. And we'll see what the long term character. It will be interesting to see what the long term characteristics is if I'm able to do what I say I'm going to do, which is when if I change the architecture, am I willing to throw away those unit tests? Because I
Yes.
think that's an important part of it, is that like, okay, the implementation changed, we'll just nuke them. And like, we're doing things differently. We'll see if that holds up or not. But I've had success with that, so I want to incorporate that into my software engineering class next fall.
That's amazing. I think you're so right, because I have a allergy to test writing. I'm just too lazy for it. I just want to get to making the stuff,
Yeah.
and I've worked in plenty of places where you got to write tests, and it's just like, oh, okay. And the thing that I hated the most was test driven development. I I
Mm,
I kind of believed in the kind of idea. They kind of had me with like, this is how it should work, and I'm like, yeah, I get that, it makes sense, but I hate doing it, and it's like taking your medicine or something. And so for me, when I started seeing AI coding agents working well, the
uh-huh.
first thing I started doing was like, maybe I could try test driven development again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and because everybody's
Or
doing vibe coding, right? And they're just going,
yeah.
make me a thing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, write me a whole load of tests
Yeah.
first, and
Yeah.
then make the thing.
Yeah, I
And it
actually
worked.
I go the other way. I make the thing because I like writing code. I want to write the code. I don't want the
Right.
clanker to write the code.
Okay.
I want to write the code, and then I write the code, and I'm like, okay, this does the thing that I think it's gonna do, and I might write a couple of tests to get it going, and then be like, all right, exhaustively test this, like find any corner cases or whatever, and that's been pretty effective for me. And I don't know. We'll see how it holds up in the long term, but I'm not. Again with AI, I'm like I try to be balanced about it. Like there's good
Hmm.
aspects and there's bad aspects of it, and I
Totally.
think vibe coding a whole like application is a bad idea. Probably, may work for
Terrible
some things.
idea.
It may work for some situations, but not for the situations I want to be in. But then you also don't want to be unreasonable about it, and it's a useful tool. And
Yeah.
one thing, another area where I think it could make a difference is, and this is something that we did in 4.0, is I had an LLM generate a mock fetch implementation
Right.
with really specific requirements for the way I
Mm,
wanted it to work. And I could have built that, but
mm.
I didn't want, with all the callbacks and promises and all that stuff, it would have taken me quite a
So,
while to do so. And by doing that, it allowed us to remove a dependency. And so
Yeah.
that to me was like, that's a win because now I have something that behaves exactly the way I want. I can read the code and I know, the fetch API well enough. I can see what it's doing and like, yeah, that's the right thing. And it's behaving properly in our tests. And that, I think that was an interesting use of it to like, I mean, the class or the JavaScript file is like 80 lines of code, but there are 80 lines of code that would have taken me, like, it would have been a slog to get that turned out. And it wouldn't have been that's not what I was interested in. I wanted to write tests. I just didn't want to introduce another dependency. So I wonder if you have kind of domain expertise, if it can help cut down on the number of dependencies. HTMX has zero runtime dependencies,
Yeah.
but it does have some fairly heavy dev time dependencies. Like we use Mocha and all that stuff. And I don't think we would try and replace Mocha and Chai because those are just such big pieces of
Hmm.
functionality. But for little things like a fetch mock, it was effective for that. And so again, I think you just have to kind of be balanced about these things. My perspective on it is like I want to be the lead developer. So I want it to be a helper, and
Yes.
do like stuff that I don't want to do, like
Do
spend a
the
ton of
boring
time.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I can write the code, and so that's the way that I'm trying to use it, in as much as I am.
That's
So
amazing. So do you think maybe do you think hypermedia just on the AI systems type
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
do you think it could become the UI protocol, for example,
Yeah,
for like
it's interesting you mentioned that because that my next academic paper, I want to do a comparison between MCP and Hypermedia as far as
mm,
agents consuming and working with it and see which one works better because I feel, I don't want to go in with preconceptions, but my sense is that LLMs can probably work pretty well with hypermedia controls. Like it's got a bunch of context and like words and descriptions and all this junk, and then the actions that the LLM can take right there in hypermedia. And so I wonder if I want to compare those two, in a reasonably controlled environment and see if we can't get some numbers on like, okay, given this setup, like it took an LLM this long to figure out how to buy a train ticket or whatever, something like that, with MCP versus with Hypermedia, and see, because there is an opportunity. There's an old article I wrote called "Helios is for Humans." It's actually it's on the Intercooler JS website. I need to link to that. I think I linked to it on the HTMX.org website. And in that, I go through how one of the reasons why Helios didn't work for JSON APIs that
mm,
well. Like some people use it for like, but it's a pretty specialized situation with JSON APIs. But it worked like unbelievably well for the web. Like you don't even when you're doing just like normal Web 1.0 development, you don't even think about Helios because it's just the way things work, right?
yeah,
And so why is that, right? And my assertion in that article or essay or whatever you want to call it was that it's because humans have agency. Like we can, look at new and novel content and make decisions based on the context.
yes,
And I said in that article, like if AI ever gets sufficiently advanced, maybe AI can take advantage of Helios as well.
yes.
Sorry if I didn't mention it. Hypermedia is the engine of application state, which is like the fundamental architecture of the web. And so I'm curious to see that. I don't, again, I'm not an expert on LLMs in any way. Like I'm like very grug brain on this stuff. It's like it's all magic as far as I'm concerned. But I do know when I look at MCP and I look at hypermedia, I'm like, it feels like maybe the hypermedia infrastructure can work as well as MCP, and then you have something that'll work for both humans and AI. And like maybe,
Well,
or
that's
so
that's a really interesting point because like just this week I've been hitting so I'm working with a company called Anam, which is a real-time video avatar stuff, and I've been working on their orchestration layer, which is kind of like it's a real-time, it's a bit like if you replaced one of us with a video avatar, and so you can have a
sure,
chat with an AI. So
sure,
it's not just voice, but it's a video in real time. So it's quite a difficult thing to do. And one of the things that we've been looking at, and I've been helping them build is the agents layer. So the AI agents layer, and everybody, I don't, you've probably heard the whole thing about RAG, right? So everyone's like
No.
using, you're not heard of RAG,
No, I'm
retrieval
sorry.
augmented something or other, right? I can't
Okay.
remember what it stands for, but it's basically it's the knowledge base for an LLM. So the way that it worked originally, and that they've got more complicated now, but the way they originally worked is you take a document, you chunk it up into bits, and then you would create an embedding. So, like, you'd create a vector using an LLM from that chunk of text, which would give you a like this kind of vector in some embedding space. And then what you do is you've got all of these chunks, and then you save those embedding vectors, and then you can use something like cosine similarity or something to search for vectors that are similar. So let's say you've got, like, I don't know, a shopping list or something. Shopping list is probably a bad one, but let's say you've got like a document about your business in there, right? And then there's a paragraph that talks about your policies for hiring.
Mm-hmm.
And so you embed that as a vector. And then I asked the question in the chat, hey, what are your policies for hiring? And maybe use different wording or something, but something similar to that. And then
Uh-huh.
the vector that will come out of my question will be in a region similar to the bit that's been embedded, and it'll find it and maybe some others. And then we pull those chunks out and we put them into the context of the LLM, and we say, here's some information that might be useful. And then it answers it. It works for some things, and it's really kind of sensitive, but it's not great for, it doesn't have any relational understanding. You've got to really control the scope of the data and all that kind of thing. It's not great. Anyway, I was hitting this problem this week while we were building a system like this, and I suddenly thought hypertext is perfect for this, because
Uh-huh.
not only do you have a concept of content, so you've
Uh-huh.
got images, you've got text,
Uh-huh.
but you've also got the hierarchical graph like
Yeah.
representation of the data, where so you can traverse through the. And so I built a solution on that premise, and it
Uh-huh.
works really well. It so you what I treated anchor tags, like the kind of
Uh-huh.
in inline anchor tags that you'd normally give
Yeah.
to a subsection of a page. I
Yeah.
treat them as like as a chunk, and then I
Yeah.
would embed those, and then that means that you can search for those anchors across your entire document space. And then you can then just go, you can let the LLM go on a little walk around it and go, hey, I want to go and look at the parents, or I want to go look at all the children links. Oh, that looks like an interesting link. I'll go there. What can I do here? And
Right.
I wonder if, because that was like, I called that hypermedia or something, RAG or something. But I wonder if something like that would like be a bigger
Yeah.
concept for what you
Yeah.
thought.
Well, it was my understanding that there would be no math in this interview, and so the use of the word vector and
Okay,
space and so forth
let's
is a
call it a
little
number.
intimidating to me. um,
A number with
but I don't know.
brackets.
I just don't know that stuff well enough to have like an informed opinion on it. But what I will say is that it seems to me like that, like the idea of text with actions embedded in the text and in a
Yeah,
hierarchical relationship with linking in between them and then descriptions of those links in English. That seems like a pretty good knowledge base for something that can do some inference from to me. And
absolutely.
so I just feel like there's an opportunity there to look at, hypermedia in terms of the performance of automation against hypermedia interfaces. And it might be, one of these ironies of life, like that the hypermedia APIs end up surviving longer than the specialized JSON APIs. Like, wouldn't that be funny? I mean, that would be funny if it turns
I,
out that.
I wouldn't be surprised at all, because, like you're saying, if the bots now that are going crawling sites, they're looking for people are creating these LLMs dot text files, right, for your website, which is effectively like a little a text file for the agent, the LLM agent, to have a look and go, hey, here's all the kind of content and important stuff that I can read. But you only need that if you've got a difficult website to navigate.
Right.
If you've got
If only there were
normal
some standard,
Hypermedia,
if only there were some standard for returning the content and the actions available on that content to systems. And, so yeah, I'm being, flippant, but it does feel, I don't, again,
yes,
I am the probably the least informed person on AI in the tech world, but it does,
but you
I
might
just
become the
see.
most informed by just by
No, I'm
proxy.
just gonna keep doing hypermedia, and I think it seems like it should work well for systems that need context and actions available in that context. That sounds an awful lot like hypermedia to me. So
Do you think that, and it's kind of related to the AI thing, but do you think we're responsible for keeping software understandable? Like,
absolutely.
what have you kind of learned from watching people misuse HTMX?
I shouldn't have made history cached locally. Like there's three hard problems, or what, two hard problems in computer science: naming, cache invalidation, and off by one errors. And I just, that was dumb. Like, so that in 4.0 we took the cache out, and that'll be an
Right.
extension. So I'm guilty. It's just I'm guilty of, I wrote the Grug Brain essay, and I like, every day I'm like not living up to that essay. It's just
I
like,
don't think anybody can. It's an impossible
yeah,
standard.
it's hard, and like, oh, this will be cool if I do this, and then you start pulling the the whatever out, and it just keeps going and going and going. So I just,
Yeah.
do you know GK Chesterton? Have you ever heard of GK Chesterton? Okay. He's got a quote that's like, what embitters the world is not too much criticism, but an absence of self-criticism. And so I'm trying, like, I just find
Humility.
this humility, but also self-criticism, like,
Mm.
like legit, like, you effed this up, kid, type stuff. And I found that hasn't been as embittering as I expected. I used to be really worried, like, oh, I'm going to make a mistake. And now someone's like, you effed this up. And I'm like, yep, I sure did. And I think that's been healthy for me. So I don't know. I'm kind of wandering here a little bit, but I feel like, the just that's been my approach. Yeah. So I try not to be too hard on other people and be maybe a little bit harder on myself.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you've ever done code reviews or had code
Yeah.
reviews done by other people, um,
Yeah.
you know what it's like to be.
Yeah.
I, when I was mentioned before, I worked in music professionally, and that one of the things in the creative space that you get used to is absolutely annihilating criticism. And you'd produce something that you think is the best thing that anyone's ever heard, and you get cut down to pieces
Yeah.
um, in
You know,
seconds, and you get used to it.
it's funny you say that because, like, I've if there's one thing I know less about AI, it's music. Like, I have less than zero musical talent. I can screw up like playing a CD or like whatever. Like, but
Yeah, but can you enjoy music?
I can kind of enjoy, but my music taste is like so basic. It's like, But one thing that's interesting you say that, because an interesting fact that I learned recently was that Dire Straits, "Money for Nothing," when they recorded that, first of all, the way they got that sound of that intro and the guitar in that was by accident. Like, someone had knocked over a mic, and it was just happened to be in the exact right spot for the feedback,
Hmm.
and it got that incredible sound. And when they recorded it and they put it on the album, those guys, and Mark Knopfler is just, obviously, like, what can you say about the guy? And
He's amazing.
they didn't think it was gonna be a hit. They were like, yeah, it's an okay song, and it's like one of the most, like, iconic songs of all time now. And I'm
It's
like,
unbelievable. It's
I'm
never
upset.
dies, that song.
Yeah, that it comes on and all my kids are pumped. I'm pumped. Everyone's pumped. We're all psyched. because Money for Nothing has come on, and they didn't recognize at the time that that was such a great song, and that like I just again I learned that like a couple months ago and was like, man, that is crazy that in music like it's so you just never know, you just never know, man. It's really hard to
I
see
bumped
like
into Mark
what could
Knopfler
happen
once. I've
next.
met him,
Yeah.
and I held the door open for him, and he
Oh
said
yeah.
thanks.
Hey,
That
let's
was it.
go. You're basically friends at this point.
Yeah,
Mark,
yeah,
if you're watching, I love your stuff.
yeah. Oh man, I think their stuff is phenomenal. Um, they had such a sound, and their production was out of this world. But we're not going to talk about. We're not going to get onto music. But if you were teaching the web today, where would you start?
I'd start with HTTP and HTML. I'd go bottom up because the web is such a simple system, and it's a system that you can understand all of it, with the exception
Yeah.
of building a browser. Right?
Yes.
Like the browser, you just kind of have to assume, like, okay, the browser is just there and it's a thing. The browser is an incredible piece of
Uh-huh.
software, and like you can't get your head around that. But you can get your head around like HTTP and how it works, and HTML for the most part. And CSS starts to spiral a little bit, JavaScript starts to spiral a little bit, but you can understand all that stuff from like a bottom up. Like, look, there's no magic here. We're going to build a web server with just using sockets. And then,
Yeah.
okay, now we're going to add some dynamic behavior, and okay, now like maybe we'll throw HTMX into the mix and do some, like let's learn HTML first and Web 1.0, like how to use a form and like use the native control, hypermedia controls of the
Yeah.
web. And okay, now let's turn the crank and maybe learn a little HTMX so we can start making the experience a little more dynamic using the same concepts. So that's how I would do it. And I'm actually teaching a class next semester that's basically that. So
Oh, I'm jealous. I'm
yeah.
totally
Well,
jealous. That would be
I'm gonna screw it up, and then next year I'll have it all fixed and I'll make it public. So
amazing. That would be a great class to be in. I'd love that. Um, if you could think of if you like had the ear of every framework developer, so every client side JavaScript framework, kind of the originator, what would you say to them? What would be like what would be the message that is the like, is there anything to say, or is it just is there like
stay
a word of
positive.
wisdom?
Stay positive. Don't
Yeah,
get like, don't get wrapped up in the negativity stuff. And
yeah,
that's what I would say. I don't think, everything's so different. And I think there's a ton of room in the world for a bunch of different approaches to software. And, you know, the like one library that I love that doesn't get a lot of attention compared to HTMX anyways is Unpoly. Like, have you ever heard of Unpoly?
yeah.
Yeah, Unpoly's it's a great library, very different than HTMX, very
Hmm.
but still hypermedia oriented, but much more it's more of a framework, but it has advantages. Like it has this notion of layers and all this stuff that's like really useful. And I just, I've always had a good relationship with the guy who creates Unpoly, and I try, to push people like, hey, go check out Unpoly too because it's a cool idea. And so I think that just like trying to stay positive is what I would probably tell other people. Like,
Do you think
it's
you would
all good.
find do you think you'll find a place within a kind of hypermedia system where it naturally can dovetail with a framework, or s- you know deliberately make a way to interface with something like
Ye-
React or Vue or
Yeah, yeah. I'm starting to develop a theory on that, which is there's an HX preserve attribute, which tells
hmm
you, which you can say like, don't mess with this thing.
yeah,
And that attribute can work with the new API move before, so it can move stuff around in the DOM without losing all the visual state. And I have a theory that I want to, in the HTMX4 line, explore where that HX preserve is your island of interactivity, right?
right,
Like that's where your reactive state can live, and you can use, whatever, like Solid or, React
yeah,
or like any of these guys. They've all got their own sort of takes on
hmm
that stuff. And so that is the area that I'm going to be exploring, as like, here's the I don't want to say official, but like the way we know will work pretty well to interface between these two things. And then what I would ask, so here's something I would ask those developers, is
Mm,
can you please integrate with the rest of the system via events and form participation? Because those are the two standards of the web,
mm,
like events and form
yeah,
participation. And if you start storing stuff elsewhere, like, other people can't work with you. If you have your own thing and like, no, you never fire any events to let people know stuff has changed, it starts
yeah,
to get really difficult to interface with you in a way that isn't super brittle. Events are problematic. They're hard to debug sometimes, but they're
yes.
great for allowing decoupling, like integration between fundamentally decoupled pieces of software. So maybe that's something I would say to most.
So is that in a way to try and ring fence the kind of more ephemeral kind of
Yeah,
state?
yeah, exactly. Like if you've got a chunk of content that needs the more elaborate, like sort of visual infrastructure,
Yeah,
fine. Mark it as HX preserved. Just emit events out of it, and then if you need to participate in a form, make sure there are form elements in it so that we can,
got you.
include that information when we make requests in the stuff that's surrounding it. That's what I think, that's my push for web standards, I guess, is like events and form participation are the best mechanism for working with anything. Because then libraries don't need to hook up to specific APIs. Like they can just, if you make it possible for a library to listen for an event and collect form values, then whatever your island of interactivity is doing is cool, and it can just listen for event. The user of both libraries can tie them together using events, which are very flexible. And then if that library makes requests, like HTMX includes form values in those requests, and so that's probably what I'd say.
Sounds awesome. Hooking back into the negativity thing, um, do you think the web's best days are behind us or ahead of us? What is your gut feel on the?
I think we're in a silver age. I think the golden age was like 1995 to maybe 2010,
Hmm.
and we're in a silver age, and that doesn't bother me. Like, I don't, the golden age is like, heroic and all that stuff.
Hmm.
I think a lot of patterns have been kind of worked out at this point, and it's more of a just, okay, pick the tool that works the best for the problem, and we don't have to have like, the Steve Jobs announcement every year that like completely changes everything again, right? So I don't think that's a bad thing. I like silver ages; they tend to be more stable.
Yeah.
I hope we don't enter an iron age, but I'm not discounting the possibility entirely.
Or stone. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Stone Age. We'll see. But so I do think, and that's okay. Like I'm
Hmm.
comfortable with that. Like HTMX at the end of the day is not that different than intercooler JS. And HTMX2 was very much not that different from HTMX1. And HTMX4, despite the change to fetch internally and the internal changes, is not that different from HTMX2. Like there's HX get and all that junk it's all the same. It all should behave the same if we do our job right. And so it's just changing the implementation so it's a little bit cleaner and a lot smaller, turns out. And so I think that's, I'm comfortable with that. I think people, there was again, that we're living in the echoes of that heroic age of technology where you had to throw away your computer every 2 years, and like
Hmm.
there was a lot of that was exciting. I remember being like really excited about new computers and new video game
Yeah.
systems and all this stuff, and that was cool. But also it was bad because you ended up throwing away a lot of good stuff. And
Totally.
I don't mind a more where like one thing I do in my systems class is I try to review old computers, like the PDP-1, for example, by Digital. And I do that so that like the students have a sense of history, and then also recognize like there's a lot of ideas from the past that like still apply, and in somewhat
Yeah.
like at some level like what they had was better in a subjective, like, get your head around it sort of way
Hmm.
than what we have today. And it can still do
Yeah.
useful computing and all that stuff. And so there's a little bit of solidarity with the past in technology that I think has not been a big focus in technology in general because of that sort of the echoes of that heroic age of technology. And so, I think we can maybe start looking back. HTMX and intercooler certainly look back at hypermedia, like a lot of the hypermedia work that was
Hmm.
done in the 90s and even before then, in solidarity, like not like that stuff is no longer useful, or look at these old guys talking about stuff that doesn't matter, but like, yeah, there's some good ideas there, and we can update them and do some interesting stuff with them today. So
My son's at university at the moment, and he's finishing off a computer science degree, and that they get taught. I mean, you're running a course, you know what this is like, but that they get taught a good few years behind the
mhm.
curve of
Yeah,
where things are at.
yep.
And one of the things that he did was he brought into his project HTMX because you know
Because
dad
dad,
told him
2-year-old dad
dad,
told him to. Good
dad
boy.
told him to, and he absolutely loved it, and it was able to deliver the project and all the changes, and and I think the what they discovered, and people on the course were obviously trying to build with React and other things, and what they're discovering is that it's quite easy to get started, but once the complexity starts to ramp up, they're facing the same problems that we all faced in a in the kind of environment of trying to build big scaling applications with these front end frameworks. And it can totally be done, but it's really hard to do, and especially if you haven't got loads of experience. So I just wondered what you thought, like, kind of closing up, what what advice you would give to people starting out in software today, who are wanting to get into web application development. What should they focus their time on learning and doing?
Yeah, I like that fundamentals approach, going down to like what's HTTP and
Mm,
what are the like go through all of HTML, like what's all the stuff that's available, and how do you build a web 1.0 style application. And
hmm.
then from there you can start branching out, and, depending on what your interests are. I think there's a danger. I'm struggling with this in my classes, which is AI can pretty much do any assignment I can throw at kids now. And so my classes used to be set up where the projects were worth like 80% because I want you
Mm,
writing code. And that's a piece of advice I give to my students, which is you need to be writing code and you need to learn the debugger. You need to learn the visual debugger because that's going to teach you more about how computers work than every word I can possibly throw at you from a podium. Like you
hmm.
need to be debugging and stepping through and seeing how a loop works and how step into functions and see what they do and like dispel all the mystery. So those are definitely two pieces of advice that I give students. But there's a lot of students that just the reality is like they're going to be lazy. They're going to use AI to like generate the code. And so what I'm doing next semester actually is I'm flipping it so that I have quizzes, and the quizzes are going to be in person, pencil and paper, no computer, no phone, no mobile, like no digital, and
Brutal.
those are going to be 50% of your grade. And the questions are not going to be hard. They're not going to be hard, but they're going to be like you got to know the content in order to take them. And then the projects are only going to be 50%, and I just assume everyone's going to get 100% on them because that's what's happening right now. Is like people are either doing it and doing a good job, or they're just throwing AI at it and like just turning it in. In which case, so it's just no longer. I think the one thing, it's kind of ironic, but I agree with a lot of the criticisms of the modern university. But one thing the modern university is set up to do is pencil and paper tests.
Yes.
we have all this
Bring them back.
infrastructure. We have all this infrastructure around for doing that. And that may ironically turn out to be like a useful signal to people in the market with like,
Yes.
you got a degree, it means you actually sat down and like wrote down some information without all this other stuff and have some idea what the hell's going on. You're not just using AI to coast through things. So again, one of those like just ironies of life. I was like, struggling with like, how am I going to deal with the AI apocalypse and grading? And then it's like, oh, like we
Pen and
just do
paper.
it, just pen and paper, do it the old school way. So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
the other thing, I would say to CS students, and I say this to all my students, is number one, don't get intimidated by computer science. Like I think von Neumann said, like you don't understand math, you just get used to it. And computer science is very much like that. Like you just have to keep grinding and going back to it. And it's always a step function. Like you never
Mm,
know when that step is going to occur. And so it can feel like you make no progress for like 6 months and then suddenly boom. Use the debugger because that helps with that. But and then the other thing that I tell them is computer science is good, but better is pairing computer science with domain knowledge. So if you have knowledge about a particular business, like if your parents run a business or if you've got an uncle that runs like a business, like go and learn a business because computer science degree useful. I don't think the hiring, difficulties will last forever if you just have a pure CS degree. But if you know computer science and a business, like you are very employable and you can often make your own employment. And so I encourage people to like go out and learn a business as well, learn something that's not technical. And every
mm.
non-technical company has technical people, like they have a software group or at least an IT group that can be turned into a software group pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Last point. When's HTMX4 coming out?
Well, the alpha shipped yesterday, and that was horrifying. That was quite a push, but I've got a couple of guys working on it with me that are real good. So
So we're
um,
close.
I think that was an alpha, so I wouldn't call us close. I would say probably another alpha or two, and then a couple of betas, and then we'll start doing some release candidates. It is pretty. Most of the code that I think needs to be written has been written at this point. Like there's no feature in HTMX2 that is not either in HTMX4 or explicitly
Hmm.
removed and we'll move a lot of those features to extensions. So it's hard. Software takes as long as it takes, but right now I'm anticipating an early to mid 2026 release of the final version of it.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation and got as much out of it as I did. And if you've lasted to this point, then amazing. Well done. Like and subscribe to keep in touch with the content that I'll be bringing out shortly.